It's quite an interesting point there, Steve. Because like I say, the first few episodes that we did have been focused on that, understanding the who and understanding the what. And then before we even get on to the point of speaking about a curriculum, why is it really important from sort of what you've learned over the years to really understand the who and understand what before we even start looking at the curriculum?
I think it's, yeah, there's no one size fits all, Chris. It's, I I I I remember I did a I went to Serbia for a couple of weeks as a volleyball coach, and I went to a talent performance camp in Serbia, and this is back in about 2011, and there was probably about 70 or 80 kids in there, all pretty talented, who traveled from different parts of the Balkans, Croatia, Macedonia, you know, um, across the way to learn the sport of volleyball. I've been coached by top professionals in Serbia, and it was completely different to how they taught a coach technically, and even their technical model, what they're expecting tactically. Uh, Mentally and physically far more resilient than we were, and the training conditions, although our training conditions weren't ideal, they were much more severe. These kids were training at 32, 33 degrees temperature. There was no air conditioning at all. This was in midsummer, but they knew how to rehydrate. They Nobody was being compromised or whatever. And I remember talking to the Serbian coaches about it, and I says, well, what can I learn from it? He says, you can learn a lot, but remember, you live in England, we live in Serbia. We coach Serbians, you coach English. You know. Now there are certain commonalities, but it's got to be fit for purpose. So I don't think you can just pick up everything that we do in Serbia because we're so much better and the sport's so much more developed and transplant it to England. You've got to make sense of it and say, well, what's right for the participant, your players in England, and the conditions and the aspirations. And that taught me an awful lot. So, it was kind of a formative experience. How much do I use from that Serbian experience? Probably not a lot because of that. However, just learning about those processes and their understanding of their participant and how far they could challenge their participant, and when they needed to reassure the participant, and when they were able to work and overload the participant. Their knowledge and understanding of the players was far superior to mine. But again, they've been doing it. They were full-time professionals. They do it as a living, but you could tell, yeah. So it's pretty insightful. And if I go back to my Zimbabwean experience, when I was playing rugby, I love playing. It was a different game, Chris. For start, it was just, you were playing in 23, 24, 25 degrees, and that was on a cold day, it was a hard ground, even I looked fast on a hard ground, so, and the ball was dry. So, kick it, well, why kick it? Again, there was now a different model of how whether the players could articulate it in that way. It was just a different style of playing based on where you were and what the players want and how the players wanted to play. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely, and that's sort of the key message that we spoke to, and it's something that Bob's spoken about a lot on the Masters. That what works for who in what circumstance and why is, you've got to be able to adapt and be able to change based on what's going on in front of you. You can't just take one thing from one environment and think it's going to be a fix into another.
Yeah, no, I'm unbelievable, and yeah, it's keeping that open-minded, and even your very own training environment, that changes from a Tuesday to Thursday. That changes into what sort of day your players have had. That changes now in terms of how we come out of this pandemic. So the environment is never ever fixed, never fixed. And you need to kind of be mindful of that. And that's not a threat. It's just the way it is. It shouldn't upset us. It's just there's an acceptance of where we're operating and how we're operating, and just making adaptations to it. But don't get stressed about it because what's the saying that we all use now? It is what it is.
Yeah, no, definitely. Definitely, I think it just highlights there that we have to go in and actually understand. And sometimes it's not. You talk about going to Serbia and comparing that to English, but sometimes you could get completely different cultural ideas from north and south of the same country. But I think it goes back to that point you made when you went to Zimbabwe, and it's a two-way thing. It's us as coaches, we've got to be able to show our human side, sometimes put our heart on our sleeve and actually build that trust within the two, especially when you are working in such different environments, like Zimbabwe. I think one thing I did pick up is that you could probably give Chris some advice on how to run fast on hard ground, because I've seen Chris run on both hard and soft, and it's equally as slow. So
consistency is key, Harrison.
I'll kick that aboard, Harrison. Maybe it's more of a challenge how to catch a dry ball. Would that be more of a challenge?
Catch a ball, tackle, run. I did well to play rugby, really. Let's be fair.
You've got that one clip. You've got that one clip of you making a tackle at Twickenham, and that's the only thing
right.
That's all he needs to show. That's all he needs to show.
All I need. So, Steve, obviously we spoke about understanding the who, and we spoke a lot with especially with the sports curriculum second years that you're the module lead for with Tom at the moment, about understanding of the sport and that building of the mental model and the performance model. We spent a lot of episode 4 sort of talking about that, but from your perspective of sort of as an educator to some of the students on it, how important of a process is that going into something like putting a curriculum together?
Oh gosh, yeah, it's you've got to know your sport. You got to know how you want to play the sport. You got to have an understanding of it, and then you got to have an understanding of how you want to play the sport for the participants that you got, the players you've got, based on their age and stage. And then you got to have an understanding of how you want to play the sport based on the time and resources you have, and the aspirations of the players. All of it is kind of into that mix. And sometimes, I feel sorry for our students sometimes, because the more variables we give them, the more factors they need to consider, the more challenging and difficult it becomes. And it is, coaching's not easy. Coaching is not definitely easy. It's not about, getting a bunch of rugby balls, a whistle, some cones, setting up a few drills, entertaining for the next hour and a half, 2 hours. That's leadership. It's not coaching. So ultimately, there needs to be an understanding of the sport, what we call, and you guys are familiar with the term, the internal logic of the sport. What do we do when we have the ball? What are the key principles in terms of where's space and how do we use time? And if we don't have possession, how do we deny space and time? And you bring it down to that very simple form, and then start to build and develop a curriculum, if you like, to play the game, which recognize the internal logic of the sport, but at the same time understands the needs and the age and stage of the players that you've got. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely, because the rules, and like we've spoken about before, the rules massively dictate how we're going to play the sport. So they're sort of they're the same, but we can like similar to with the who, we can change the performance problems are the same, but with the what we actually deliver in terms of changing that to a target performance model can change depending on the environment that we are in. So we can have a vision of how we see the game to be played, but that's got to be changeable depending on the people, the participants that we've got in front of us.
And I'm kind of pleased you brought this up in terms of for those of you who don't know, I probably forgot to mention my long diatribe that I'm now currently the Northern Ireland senior women's volleyball coach. But I guess, inverted commas, I'm teaching at national, international level, although our rankings are pretty low, but that's where we are. It's all intents and purposes, national, international. But I see myself more of a kind of a development coach, and working with youngsters, working with juniors, it's slightly different, because you're saying, if I'm working with the senior levels, I'm working with this national team currently, what I try to do is develop a curriculum, what we call a target performance model, which optimizes performance. How do we structure the game tactically? What do we need from a technical perspective? What would be the movement demands of playing this game? What would be the mental challenges, the mental demand? And you put together the curriculum, and they've got one sole purpose, is to get these guys in their mid-20s and early 30s to play the best game possible as a team. To me, it's a different ball game when you're working with 15, 16-year-olds. When I was working with the England under-17 programs and England under-19 programs, again in volleyball, they would ask me, well, why are you coaching us? Why are you getting them to play in this way? Why have you adopted the system because they'd say quite clearly the guys are not good at it. They don't play the system very, very well. They don't pass that well. They don't use the net as well as and if you played another system. And my response is, it's because they don't play this very well that we do it. You know, my objective is not here to talented identify a national team for Saturday to win. I'm looking to develop all-round players that will eventually make into the national team or play professional. So my job then with these guys is to produce a curriculum, if you like, which exposes them to different ways of playing, which allows them, gives them the opportunity to acquire, develop different techniques, to understand the key movements of the game, you know, and when they can be adopted and played, you know, and also then to understand the kind of the mental demands. And if that means we play different systems, if that means players play out of position just to understand the game, you know. So I put a wing 3/4. Apologies if I get the wrong examples here, guys, but you know, I want my back three to rotate. I want my 9 and 10 to be able to play. You know, I'm going back a bit. Austin Haley could play the whole back line. Just an amazing, you know, player. You know, I want those all-rounded players, and that means I'm going to produce a kind of curriculum sometimes which is not totally aligned, but challenges. And that I think is important. It's not purely, depending on the age and stage, purely about optimizing performance.